He sat there, on an old wooden chair, next to the hospital window, where the afternoon sunlight slanted through the changing leaves of the trees. The wind gently caressed his thinning hair, but his eyes remained steady as if he were looking through time. His name was Min. 52 years old. A man who had once been the epitome of success. A mansion, a car, million-dollar meetings, and a schedule so packed that there was no room to breathe. He lived as if time were endless, as if each day was a step toward some pinnacle, which he himself was not sure what. And then the doctor said a sentence that cut his life in half like a cold knife. "You have terminal cancer." At that moment, everything froze. No more emails, no more contracts, no more urgent calls from partners. Only the steady beeping of the heart monitor in his ear and the eerie silence of a future that suddenly seemed uncertain. He didn't cry. He didn't get angry. He just sat there, facing himself, a man who had run so fast that he forgot to look back at the road he had traveled. In the early days after his diagnosis he felt scared. But not scared of death. He was scared that he had lived in vain. Scared that he had missed so many simple moments. A meal with his family, a tight hug from his little daughter, or simply the feeling of sitting leisurely watching the rain fall. And then, a small book appeared on the hospital table as if by fate. Meditations, Marcus Aurelius. A Roman emperor. A warrior. But also a contemplative, quiet person, learning to control his emotions and live true to his nature. Min read each line. Not in a hurry. Not skimming. Each word was a wake-up call. You can't control what happens to you. But you can control how you react. And from that moment on he began to live again. Truly. No longer living to achieve but living to be. Every morning, he opened his eyes and asked himself, if today were my last day, how would I live? The question was not to instill fear but to awaken appreciation. He began to write a diary. Not about his illness but about gratitude. Grateful that he could still feel the morning sun on his skin. Grateful that he could still hear his daughter's laughter. Grateful that even as his body decayed, his soul grew clearer. He learned to let go of what he could not control, a core Stoic philosophy. No more anger over test results. No more blaming fate. No more clinging to what could have been. Because as Epictetus said, we suffer not because of things but because of how we think about them. Once the doctor told him he had 6 months. He smiled, not trembling. Then I will live those 6 months as 6 lives. He turned his hospital room into a small studio. Set up a camera, opened a YouTube channel and shared his journey. Not to complain but to inspire life. In each video he talked about the silence after his diagnosis. About the first time he shaved his head, but felt relieved, like he had taken off a mask. About the nights when he couldn't sleep, but could still hear his heartbeat. Something he had never cared about before. He shared lessons from Stoic philosophy, that life is not about running away from pain, but learning to welcome it as an inevitable part of human existence. Slowly, comments poured in from all over. A young woman who lost her mother wrote, "You helped me understand that loss is not the end." A young man who had just lost his job said, "I realized that I was still alive. And that was enough to start over." And Min realized, even though his body was weakening, he was living stronger than ever. He began to love the smallest things. A cup of ginger tea in the early morning. A quiet conversation with his wife at the hospital bed. His daughter holding his hand as they watched the sunset. Before he lived to aim for distant goals. Now he lives to feel every breath, every step, every blink. Stoic philosophy teaches. No one promises us tomorrow. But we always have today to live right. And he lives as if today is a privilege. Once a friend came to visit, burst into tears. "Min, why aren't you angry? Why don't you blame life?" He smiled very gently. "I was. But then I understood. Angry or not, the cancer is still here. The only difference is that if I'm angry, I lose all the remaining days. But if I accept, I will live each day as a gift." That's what Stoicism teaches us, not to be cold but to be calm in the midst of a storm. Not to deny emotions but to master them. Not to pretend not to hurt but to not be controlled by pain. 6 months passed. Then 7. Then 8. Min was still alive. Not living long but living deeply. He continued to write, continued to make videos, continued to talk to people he had never met. Because he understood that life is not measured by the number of years, but by the impact you leave on the hearts of others. One day when he felt his strength fading, he wrote the last sentence in his diary. "I didn't choose cancer. But I chose to live with it. I don't know when I will die. But I know I have lived fully." And if anyone reads this, I just want to say one thing. Don't wait for a diagnosis to start living. Because every day right now is a gift. Min passed away on a peaceful afternoon, surrounded by his family. No fanfare. No noise. Just the gentle sunlight shining through the window. And the videos, the messages, the lessons continue to spread. That man did not live forever. But the way he lived touched thousands, millions of hearts. And that is what Stoicism teaches us. Greatness does not come from living long, but from living right. Live deeply. Live mindfully. Live as if today is all you have. Because it is.